Lady Victoria Ashworth stepped out of her silver sedan and immediately regretted her decision. The charity gala was being held at the Old Meridian Hotel, a building that had seen better days 50 years ago. Now it stood like a forgotten monument in the worst part of the city, surrounded by empty lots and shadows that seemed to move on their own. She pulled her diamond necklace closer to her throat and glanced back at her driver.
"Marcus, are you absolutely certain this is the right address?"
The young man behind the wheel looked barely old enough to shave, let alone serve as her personal protection. His thin frame seemed lost inside his crisp black suit, and his nervous smile did nothing to inspire confidence. When her usual security team had fallen ill with food poisoning earlier that day, the agency had sent Marcus as an emergency replacement.
"Yes, ma'am. The Meridian Hotel on Warehouse District Boulevard. This is definitely the place."
His voice cracked slightly on the last word, making him sound even younger than his 20-something appearance suggested.
Victoria sighed and adjusted her evening gown.
As the daughter of Senator Ashworth and heiress to a pharmaceutical empire worth billions, she was used to attending events in much more prestigious locations. But the Children's Hospital Foundation had specifically chosen this venue to make a point about helping forgotten communities.
"Very well. But stay close, Marcus. I don't like the feeling of this neighborhood." Marcus nodded eagerly and quickly exited the driver's side.
He stumbled slightly as he walked around the car, catching himself on the hood with an embarrassed laugh. Victoria closed her eyes and wondered how this awkward young man was supposed to protect her from anything more dangerous than a particularly aggressive waiter. The hotel's lobby was a study in faded grandeur. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their light dimmed by decades of accumulated dust. The red carpet had worn thin in places, revealing the concrete floor beneath. Despite the organizers' best efforts with flowers and decorative lighting, the space still felt more like a funeral parlor than a celebration venue.
"Lady Ashworth!"
A cheerful voice called out from across the lobby.
"So wonderful that you could make it."
Victoria turned to see Margaret Chen, the foundation's director, approaching with arms outstretched. Behind her followed a small group of donors and board members, all wearing their most diplomatic smiles.
"Margaret, darling. Wouldn't miss it for the world."
Victoria air-kissed both of Margaret's cheeks while mentally calculating how soon she could politely leave.
"The venue is certainly unique." "Oh yes, we wanted to showcase the area where many of our families live." "Really helps put things in perspective, doesn't it?"
Victoria nodded and allowed herself to be led into the main ballroom. Marcus followed a few steps behind, his head swiveling back and forth as he took in their surroundings. Several other guests had already arrived, most looking as out of place as Victoria felt. The evening proceeded predictably. Victoria made small talk with pharmaceutical executives, wrote a substantial check for the foundation, and posed for photographs with various board members. She even managed to enjoy the dinner, which was surprisingly good despite the questionable venue. Marcus remained nearby throughout the evening, though his presence was hardly reassuring. He knocked over a water glass while trying to pull out her chair and nearly walked into a waiter carrying a tray of champagne. Victoria found herself wondering if the agency had sent him as some sort of practical joke. It was nearly 10 o'clock when things began to change. Victoria was standing near the bar, listening to a pharmaceutical executive drone on about quarterly projections, when she noticed Marcus had gone very still. His usual nervous fidgeting had stopped completely, and his head was turned slightly toward the ballroom's main entrance. "Excuse me," she said to the executive, then stepped closer to her bodyguard.
"Marcus? Is something wrong?" "Ma'am, we need to leave. Right now."
His voice had changed completely.
Gone was the nervous crack, replaced by something cold and precise. "What?"
"The evening isn't over yet, and I haven't given my speech now."
The single word carried absolute authority.
Marcus moved to her side, his hand touching her elbow with gentle but firm pressure.
"Trust me on this."
Victoria looked toward the entrance and saw nothing unusual. Guests were still arriving and mingling. The hotel staff moved efficiently between tables, clearing dishes and refilling glasses.
Everything appeared perfectly normal.
But something in Marcus's tone made her reconsider. She had spent her entire life surrounded by security professionals, and she recognized the sound of genuine concern.
Very well.
But this had better not be some sort of false alarm. Marcus guided her toward a side exit, moving with a fluid grace that seemed completely at odds with his earlier clumsiness. Victoria noticed he was no longer bumping into furniture or stumbling over his own feet. Instead, he moved like a dancer, each step placed with deliberate precision. They had almost reached the exit when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing the ballroom in an eerie red glow.
Guests began murmuring in confusion, then, alarm.
Someone screamed from across the room. "Stay close to me," Marcus whispered, his mouth near her ear.
"No matter what happens, don't let go of my hand." Victoria felt his fingers intertwine with hers.
His grip was surprisingly strong, and she could feel calluses on his palm that she hadn't noticed before. These weren't the soft hands of a nervous young driver. These were the hands of someone who worked with weapons.
The first gunshot came from the main entrance. Then, another.
Then, a rapid series of pops that could only be automatic weapons. Panic erupted throughout the ballroom.
Guests ran screaming toward any exit they could find, trampling over chairs and each other in their desperation to escape.
The dignified charity gala had transformed into a nightmare in the space of seconds. Marcus pulled Victoria behind the bar as figures in black tactical gear poured through the main entrance. They moved with military precision, spreading out to cover all exits while others began herding guests into the center of the room.
Down on the ground. Everyone down now.
The voices were electronically distorted, making them sound inhuman. Victoria pressed herself against the bar's wooden base, her heart hammering against her ribs.
Who are they? What do they want? You, Marcus said simply. They want you. Me?
But why would your father's committee approve new drug pricing regulations last week?
Some people weren't happy about that.
Marcus peered over the bar for a moment, then ducked back down.
12 of them.
All armed with assault rifles.
They're professionals. How can you possibly know that from a quick look?
Marcus turned to face her in the dim red light, and Victoria felt her breath catch. The nervous, awkward young man from earlier had completely disappeared.
In his place was someone else entirely.
His eyes were cold and calculating, scanning their environment with the practiced gaze of a predator.
Because I'm a professional too. Victoria Ashworth. A electronically distorted voice called out from the ballroom floor. We know you're in here. Come out now and nobody else gets hurt.
To emphasize the point, one of the gunmen fired a burst into the ceiling.
Chunks of plaster rained down on the terrified guests. We need to move, Marcus said.
They'll find us in about 30 seconds.
Move where?
They have the exits covered. Marcus smiled, and, for the first time that evening, it didn't look nervous at all.
Not all of them.
He reached inside his jacket and withdrew something that definitely hadn't been there during dinner. The pistol looked almost too big for his slender frame, but his hands held it with obvious familiarity.
Marcus, my name isn't Marcus, he said quietly. It's Daniel Kim.
I'm with a private security firm that specializes in high-risk protection. The agency your father uses for really dangerous situations.
But, you seem so young, so clumsy? Nervous? Yeah, that's kind of the point.
People don't worry about threats they don't take seriously.
Daniel checked his weapon with efficient movements. Your regular security team didn't get food poisoning, Victoria.
They were drugged. Someone on the inside knew about tonight's event and made sure you'd have minimal protection. The implications of his words hit her like a physical blow.
Someone had planned this.
Someone had specifically targeted her and arranged for her to be vulnerable. The nervous young driver had been the only thing standing between her and a carefully orchestrated kidnapping. Or worse. Stay behind me and do exactly what I say, Daniel continued.
When I move, you move. When I stop, you stop. If I tell you to run, you run and don't look back. Understood? Victoria nodded, not trusting her voice. Victoria Ashworth. Last warning. Come out now or we start executing hostages. Daniel tensed. Time to go. He rose from behind the bar in one fluid motion, his pistol already aimed. The first shot took out the nearest gunman before the man could even turn around. The second shot dropped another figure near the kitchen entrance. Then, Daniel was moving, pulling Victoria behind him as chaos erupted throughout the ballroom. The remaining gunmen spun toward their position, weapons tracking, but Daniel was already somewhere else. He moved like liquid mercury, flowing from cover to cover with Victoria in tow. A chair became concealment for 3 seconds, then a support pillar, then an overturned table. Each time they stopped, his pistol would bark once or twice, and another black-clad figure would drop. Victoria tried to keep track of what was happening, but everything moved too fast. One moment they were behind the bar, the next they were sprinting across open floor toward the kitchen. Bullets whined overhead and sparked off metal fixtures, but somehow none of them found their target. Daniel wasn't just protecting her. He was hunting. Between the red emergency lighting and the smoke from scattered debris, visibility was terrible. But Daniel seemed to know exactly where each gunman was positioned. He would pause for half a second, sight, fire, and move on before return fire could find him. 4 gunmen down. Then 6. Then 8. The remaining attackers began calling out to each other in clipped, professional tones. Their careful plan was falling apart, and they knew it. They had expected to face minimal resistance from a pampered socialite and her young, inexperienced bodyguard. They hadn't expected to face Daniel Kim. Kitchen in trance, Daniel whispered as they crouched behind an overturned buffet table. 20 feet. When I give the signal, run straight for the door and don't stop. What about you? I'll be right behind you. His smile was grim. These guys made a big mistake tonight. What mistake? They thought I was just some kid playing dress up. Daniel ejected his empty magazine and slammed in a fresh one. Time to show them what a real professional looks like. He stood and began walking toward the kitchen entrance. Not running, not crouching for cover, just walking with casual confidence. His pistol moved with mechanical precision, acquiring targets and firing with barely a pause between shots. The 9th gunman went down as he tried to flank their position. The 10th fell while attempting to provide cover fire for his partner. The 11th made the mistake of exposing himself for a clear shot and paid for it with his life. That left one. Daniel paused at the kitchen entrance and looked back toward the ballroom. The last gunman was somewhere in the shadows, probably trying to figure out how his professional assault team had been systematically destroyed by a single person. Victoria. Daniel called out without looking away from the ballroom. Go through the kitchen and out the back exit. My car is in the alley. Black sedan, license plate starts with KDX. Keys are in the sun visor. I'm not leaving you. Yes, you are. This last one is going to be tricky, and I need to know you're safe. Victoria hesitated, then realized he was right. She was a liability in this situation, not an asset. The best thing she could do was get out of his way and let him finish his job. She ran for the kitchen door, pushing through into the brightly lit space beyond. Hotel staff huddled behind prep counters, their faces pale with terror. Victoria pointed toward the back exit. Is that door unlocked? A young cook nodded frantically. Yes, ma'am. Goes right out to the alley. Victoria was halfway across the kitchen when she heard the final exchange of gunfire from the ballroom. 3 rapid shots, a pause, then 1 more. Then, silence. She waited by the back door, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Seconds crawled by like hours. Had Daniel won? Was he dead? Should she run for the car or wait for him? The kitchen door swung open, and Daniel stepped through. His suit jacket was torn and there was a cut on his cheek, but he was alive and moving under his own power. Is it over? Victoria asked. It's over. Daniel walked to the back exit and held it open for her.
But we need to leave before the police arrive. There's going to be a lot of questions, and some of them won't be easy to answer. They stepped into the alley behind the hotel. The black sedan was exactly where he'd said it would be.
Daniel retrieved the keys from the sun visor and started the engine while Victoria collapsed into the passenger seat.
As they drove away from the hotel, she could already hear sirens approaching from multiple directions. The charity gala that was supposed to be a routine social obligation had turned into something from an action movie.
Daniel, she said quietly. Who are you? Really?
He glanced at her in the rearview mirror, and, for a moment, his expression softened.
Someone who's very good at keeping people alive. That's all you need to know for now.
But, those men, you killed 12 people tonight.
12 people who were planning to kidnap or kill you, Daniel corrected. I'd do it again without hesitation.
Victoria leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes. Her father had always told her that the world was more dangerous than she realized, but she had never truly understood what he meant until tonight.
Now she did.
The nervous, clumsy young man who had picked her up earlier that evening had been a complete fiction. The real Daniel Kim was something else entirely, a professional killer who had just saved her life with ruthless efficiency. And, despite everything that had happened, despite the violence and terror of the evening, Victoria found herself feeling safer than she had in years. Because for the first time in her privileged life, she knew she was being protected by someone who was exactly as dangerous as the threats they faced.
The question was, what would happen when the sun came up and the real world intruded on their deadly partnership? The safe house was nothing like what Victoria had expected.
Instead of some underground bunker or abandoned warehouse, Daniel drove them to an ordinary-looking apartment complex in the suburbs. The building was clean and well-maintained, with neat landscaping and a small playground where children would probably be playing in the morning.
This is where we're hiding?
Victoria asked as they climbed the stairs to the third floor.
It looks so normal.
That's the point, Daniel replied, fishing a set of keys from his pocket. Nobody looks for dangerous people in places where soccer moms live. He unlocked apartment 3C and ushered her inside. The space was sparse but comfortable, furnished with the kind of generic furniture found in corporate housing. A couch, a dining table, a flat-screen television mounted on the wall. Everything was clean and functional, but there were no personal touches anywhere. No photographs, no books, no indication that anyone actually lived here.
Is this your home? Victoria asked. It's one of several places I use. Daniel locked the door behind them and engaged 3 separate deadbolts. Home is a luxury people in my profession can't afford.
He moved to the kitchen and began making coffee, his movements still carrying that fluid precision she had noticed at the hotel. Watching him now, Victoria couldn't understand how she had ever thought he was clumsy. Every gesture was controlled and purposeful.
You're not really 20-something, are you? She said. Daniel smiled without looking up from the coffee maker. I'm 31.
But people see what they expect to see. Young face, nervous manner, cheap suit, obviously just some kid playing bodyguard. It's a useful disguise. Victoria settled onto the couch and tried to process everything that had happened. 12 hours ago, her biggest concern had been choosing the right jewelry for a charity gala. Now she was hiding in a safe house after watching her escort kill 12 armed men with apparently minimal effort.
Daniel, I need to know what's really going on.
And don't tell me it's just about my father's committee work. There are easier ways to influence a senator than kidnapping his daughter. Daniel poured 2 cups of coffee and joined her on the couch. When he handed her the mug, she noticed his hands were completely steady. No tremor, no nervous energy. Just calm control. Your father has been working on more than just drug pricing, he said. For the past 6 months, his committee has been investigating illegal pharmaceutical trials being conducted in developing countries. Trials that used children as test subjects without proper consent.
Victoria felt her stomach drop. Children?
The investigation is still classified, but Senator Ashworth has uncovered evidence linking several major pharmaceutical companies to these trials.
Companies that stand to lose billions if the information goes public. So they decided to use me as leverage against him. That was probably the plan, Daniel agreed. Take you alive, use you to force your father to back off the investigation. If that didn't work.
He shrugged. Victoria set down her coffee cup with shaking hands. The idea that her father's political work had put her in danger wasn't new. She had lived with security her entire life because of his position. But the thought that someone would be willing to kill her to protect child abusers made her feel sick.
How do you know all this? She asked. Because my employer has been hired to protect witnesses in the investigation. Your father's committee isn't the only one looking into this. There are federal agencies involved, international organizations, even some foreign governments. This isn't just about one pharmaceutical company cutting corners. It's about a network of corruption that spans multiple countries and involves billions of dollars. Daniel stood and walked to the window, carefully checking the street below. The men who attacked tonight weren't random criminals. They were professional contractors, probably former military or intelligence operatives. Someone with serious resources hired them. So what happens now? Do I just hide here until the investigation is over?
No, Daniel said firmly.
Hiding won't work.
They know who you are, they know your patterns, and they have resources we can't match indefinitely.
The only way to keep you safe long-term is to eliminate the threat. Eliminate the threat?
Victoria repeated slowly. You mean kill more people? Daniel turned from the window to look at her directly. I mean do whatever is necessary to ensure you survive this.
If that means killing people who are trying to harm you, then, yes, that's exactly what I mean.
His tone was matter-of-fact, as if they were discussing the weather.
Victoria realized this was probably what had frightened her most about the evening, not the violence itself, but how easily Daniel had dealt with it. He had killed 12 people without apparent hesitation or remorse, and now he was calmly discussing killing more. Who are you working for? She asked. Really? A private security firm called Aegis International.
We specialize in high-risk protection for people involved in sensitive situations.
Government witnesses, corporate whistleblowers, journalists investigating dangerous stories.
Anyone who has made enemies of people with resources and few scruples.
And how did you end up doing this kind of work?
Daniel was quiet for a long moment. I used to work for the government.
Different agency, different mission. When I left that job, I wanted to use my skills for something more personal. Protecting people who actually need protection instead of protecting political interests.
Victoria sensed there was more to the story, but she didn't push. The exhaustion of the evening was beginning to catch up with her, and she was having trouble processing everything that had happened.
Get some sleep, Daniel said, apparently reading her expression. The bedroom is through that door.
I'll stay out here and keep watch.
What about you? Don't you need rest?
I'll sleep later. Right now, making sure you're safe is more important. Victoria wanted to argue, but she was too tired. She made her way to the bedroom and found it as impersonally furnished as the rest of the apartment.
Clean sheets, generic pillows, blackout curtains already drawn.
She lay down fully clothed and closed her eyes, expecting her mind to race with everything that had happened.
Instead, she fell asleep almost immediately.
She woke to the smell of bacon and eggs. Sunlight was filtering through the curtains, and she could hear Daniel moving around in the kitchen. For a moment, she almost forgot where she was and why she was there.
Then, reality came flooding back.
Victoria found Daniel at the stove, wearing the same black suit from the night before but somehow looking completely fresh. He had shaved and his hair was neatly combed. Only the cut on his cheek indicated that anything unusual had happened. How long did I sleep? She asked.
About 8 hours. I figured you needed it. Daniel plated eggs and bacon, then poured orange juice. Eat something. We have a long day ahead. Doing what?
finding out who hired those men last night. The police will investigate the scene, but they'll be looking for the wrong things. We need to find evidence that leads us to whoever is behind this." Victoria accepted the plate of food gratefully. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until she started eating. "How do we do that?" "The men who attacked last night left behind weapons, equipment, maybe communication devices. If we can trace those items back to their source, we might be able to identify their employer." "Won't the police have already collected all that evidence?" Daniel smiled grimly. "The police collected what they found. But they weren't looking in all the right places." After breakfast, Daniel made several phone calls while Victoria watched the news coverage of the previous night's events. The media was calling it a terrorist attack on a charity gala, with speculation about possible motives ranging from anti-corporate activism to foreign espionage. Senator Ashworth had issued a statement expressing his gratitude that his daughter had escaped unharmed and praising the heroic actions of her security detail. The statement made no mention of Daniel by name, and Victoria realized that was probably intentional. "Your father wants to meet with us," Daniel said, hanging up his phone. "This afternoon, at a location he considers secure." "Is that safe?" "Probably. Your father has been in politics long enough to understand operational security. Besides, we need his help if we're going to identify who's behind this." They spent the morning gathering equipment from various hidden caches throughout the apartment. Victoria watched in fascination as Daniel revealed a small armory concealed behind false walls and, inside, specially modified furniture. Pistols, ammunition, electronic devices she couldn't identify, and several changes of clothes. "Do all safe houses come equipped like this?" she asked. "The good ones do." Daniel selected a compact pistol and handed it to her. "Do you know how to use one of these?" Victoria examined the weapon nervously. "I've done some target shooting. My father insisted on basic firearms training when I turned 18. "Good. Safety's here, magazine release is here. Point, squeeze, don't jerk the trigger." Daniel demonstrated the basic controls. "Hopefully you won't need it, but I'd rather you have it and not need it than the other way around." The meeting location turned out to be a private office building in the financial district. Daniel drove them there in a different car, explaining that the sedan from the previous night had probably been compromised. As they walked through the building's lobby, Victoria noticed several men in expensive suits who didn't quite look like office workers. "More security?" she asked quietly. "Your father's people," Daniel confirmed. "He's taking this seriously." Senator Ashworth was waiting in a conference room on the building's top floor. Victoria's father looked older than she remembered, with new lines around his eyes and gray hair that had been completely brown just 6 months earlier. The stress of his investigation was clearly taking a toll. "Victoria." He embraced her tightly, and she could feel him trembling slightly. "When I heard about last night, I'm so sorry. I never meant for you to be put in danger." "It's not your fault, Dad." "Isn't it?" Senator Ashworth released her and turned to Daniel. "Mr. Kim, I presume I owe you a debt I can never repay." Daniel shook the senator's hand formally. "Just doing my job, sir." "But we need to talk about what happens next." The three of them sat around the conference table while Senator Ashworth outlined the scope of his investigation. The illegal pharmaceutical trials were worse than Victoria had imagined. Children as young as 5 had been used as test subjects for experimental drugs, often without their parents' knowledge or consent. The trials had been conducted in countries where regulatory oversight was minimal and bribes could ensure silence. "We have documented evidence of at least 12 companies involved in these practices," Senator Ashworth explained. "But we suspect the actual number is much higher. The total revenue from drugs tested through these illegal trials could exceed $50 billion. $50 billion is worth killing for," Daniel observed. "Who knows about your investigation? It's supposedly classified, but..." The senator shrugged. "Washington leaks like a sieve. Too many people have access to sensitive information, and some of them have divided loyalties.
Daniel pulled out a tablet and showed them photographs from the previous night's scene.
These men were professionals. Former military, probably special operations.
This level of contractor doesn't work cheap, and they don't work for just anyone.
Victoria studied the photographs and felt queasy. The men looked so ordinary in death, like they could have been anyone's sons or brothers or fathers. It was hard to reconcile these images with the terrifying figures who had invaded the charity gala.
Any idea who might have hired them? Daniel asked.
The list of suspects is unfortunately long, Senator Ashworth replied.
Any of the companies under investigation could have done this. Or someone could have hired contractors on behalf of multiple companies. There are also foreign governments that might have an interest in protecting their domestic pharmaceutical industries.
We need to narrow it down, Daniel said. The longer Victoria remains a target, the more dangerous this becomes. These people failed once, but they'll try again.
Next time they might be better prepared.
Senator Ashworth leaned back in his chair, looking every one of his 68 years.
What do you suggest?
Let them come to us, Daniel said simply.
But, this time, we'll be ready for them.
Victoria felt her blood run cold.
You want to use me as bait.
I want to end this, Daniel corrected.
Running and hiding won't work indefinitely.
Eventually they'll find another opportunity, and we might not be as lucky as we were last night.
Lucky?
Victoria stared at him in disbelief.
12 people died.
12 people who were trying to kidnap or kill you, Daniel reminded her.
And if we don't take the initiative now, there will be more.
Senator Ashworth was quiet for a long moment.
What did you have in mind, Mr. Kim?
Daniel outlined his plan with the same cold precision Victoria had seen him display during the gunfight. They would announce Victoria's attendance at another high-profile event, but this time they would be prepared for an attack. Multiple security teams, surveillance equipment, carefully chosen terrain that would favor defenders over attackers.
It's risky, Daniel admitted. But it's the best chance we have of ending this quickly. And if something goes wrong? Victoria asked.
Daniel looked at her with those cold, calculating eyes that had replaced his earlier nervous demeanor.
Then, I do what I'm paid to do. I keep you alive, no matter what it costs.
Victoria realized that Daniel wasn't just talking about money when he mentioned cost. He was talking about human lives, both those of their enemies and, potentially, his own.
The question was, how many people would die before this was over? And, could she live with herself if the answer turned out to be more than she could handle?
The Museum of Natural History stood like a fortress of marble and glass against the gray October sky. Victoria adjusted her earpiece for the third time as she walked up the front steps, trying to ignore the fact that every person around her could potentially be an assassin.
Nervous? Daniel asked through the communication system.
He was somewhere inside the building, having entered through a service entrance an hour earlier.
Terrified would be more accurate, Victoria replied under her breath.
The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Victoria would attend the museum's annual fundraising gala, a high-profile event that would naturally attract media attention and provide numerous opportunities for an attack. But, this time, instead of minimal security, they had assembled a team of 20 professionals from Aegis International. The museum had been chosen carefully.
Multiple exits, controllable sightlines, and enough open space to prevent attackers from easily cornering their target.
Most importantly, the building could be secured and monitored in ways that the old Meridian Hotel had not been. Remember, Daniel's voice continued in her ear, you're not really bait. You're the protected asset in the center of a very sophisticated trap.
Victoria smiled grimly. That's supposed to be reassuring? It should be. These people made a mistake going after you the first time.
If they try again tonight, they won't be facing some unprepared security detail.
Victoria entered the museum's main hall, where cocktail hour was already underway.
The space was magnificent, with soaring ceilings and dramatic lighting that turned the assembled guests into elegant silhouettes. Unlike the previous venue, this felt like a place where she belonged. Visual contact, a voice said in her earpiece. not Daniel, but one of the other Aegis operatives. Target is in the main hall, proceeding toward the reception area.
Victoria tried to act normally as she mingled with the other guests.
Most were people she knew from previous events, pharmaceutical executives, politicians, society figures who moved in her father's circles. Any one of them could be working with her would-be kidnappers, providing intelligence about her schedule and habits.
Victoria!
A familiar voice called out. Margaret Chen approached with a bright smile, apparently none the worse for the previous week's traumatic events.
So good to see you again.
I wasn't sure you'd feel comfortable attending another charitable function so soon. Life goes on, Victoria replied, accepting Margaret's air kisses. Besides, this cause is too important to let fear keep me away.
They chatted for several minutes about the museum's educational programs and the evening's fundraising goals.
Victoria found herself relaxing slightly, falling back into the comfortable rhythms of polite society conversation. For a moment, she could almost forget that armed professionals were watching her every move. Two men entering from the west entrance, Daniel's voice cut through her reverie.
Business suits, but they're moving wrong.
Too alert, scanning for threats instead of looking at the exhibits. Victoria's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral as she continued her conversation with Margaret.
They're splitting up, another voice reported.
One heading toward the main hall, the other toward the service corridors. I see them, Daniel said calmly.
Initiating surveillance.
Victoria excused herself from Margaret and moved toward the bar, following the route Daniel had mapped out earlier. The museum's layout allowed for multiple observation points, and she needed to position herself where the Aegis team could maintain visual contact while still appearing to move naturally through the event.
3 more subjects entering from the north entrance, a new voice reported. Same pattern. Professional movement, concealed weapons.
Victoria accepted a glass of champagne from the bartender, her hand steady despite the adrenaline beginning to surge through her system.
5 potential threats, possibly more.
Either this was an elaborate false alarm or someone was preparing for a much more sophisticated attack than the previous attempt.
Ma'am, we have a problem, Daniel's voice carried a new tension. These aren't contractors. They're federal agents.
Victoria nearly dropped her champagne.
What? FBI, probably some other agencies too. Someone tipped them off about tonight's operation. The implications hit Victoria like a physical blow.
If federal agents were here, it meant someone in law enforcement believed Daniel's team was the threat, not the solution. They might be walking into a trap, but not the kind they had prepared for.
What do we do? She whispered. Act normal. Keep mingling. Let me figure out what's going on.
Victoria moved through the crowd, her mind racing.
Had her father's investigation been shut down? Were the federal agents here to arrest her for some reason? Or had someone convinced them that the Aegis team posed a threat to public safety? 20 minutes passed with no further developments.
The federal agents maintained their positions but made no move to approach her. Victoria began to hope that perhaps they were there for some other reason, or that Daniel had misidentified them.
Then, the real attack began. The lights didn't go out this time.
Instead, a group of men in catering uniforms simply walked into the main hall carrying what appeared to be serving trays. Only when they reached strategic positions throughout the space did they throw back the covers to reveal automatic weapons.
Everyone on the ground. Now!
The voice was electronically distorted, just like at the hotel.
Chaos erupted instantly. Guests screamed and ran in every direction, but this time the attackers were ready for panic.
They had positioned themselves to control all major exits, trapping everyone inside the main hall.
Federal agents, someone shouted. Drop your weapons.
Gunfire erupted from multiple directions as the FBI agents revealed themselves and engaged the attackers. But the museum's acoustics turned the space into a nightmare of echoing shots and screams. Between the running guests and the confusion of multiple armed groups, it was impossible to tell who was shooting at whom. Victoria dropped behind a display case as bullets shattered glass exhibits around her. Through her earpiece, she could hear Daniel's team coordinating their response, but their carefully planned defensive positions had been compromised by the presence of the federal agents.
Victoria, where are you?
Daniel's voice was strained. Behind the dinosaur exhibit, she replied, trying to stay calm.
Stay there. Do not move until I come for you.
But staying put wasn't an option. One of the attackers was moving toward her position, using the chaos to separate her from any potential rescue. Victoria could see him approaching through the forest of exhibit displays, his weapon tracking back and forth as he searched for targets. She reached for the pistol Daniel had given her, her hands shaking as she tried to remember his instructions. Safety off, point, squeeze, don't jerk. The weapon felt impossibly heavy in her grip. The attacker rounded the corner of the display case with his rifle raised. Victoria found herself looking directly down the barrel of an assault weapon, knowing she was about to die. The shot came from somewhere behind the attacker. His body jerked forward and he collapsed, revealing Daniel standing 20 feet away with his pistol still aimed.
Are you hurt?
Daniel reached her in 3 quick strides, his eyes scanning for other threats.
No, I don't think so.
Victoria was surprised by how steady her voice sounded.
Good. We need to move. The feds think we're part of the attack team.
Daniel pulled her to her feet and began leading her toward what appeared to be a solid wall. As they approached, Victoria realized it was actually a concealed door that blended seamlessly with the museum's architecture.
Service entrance, Daniel explained as he opened the door. Leads to the administrative offices.
They slipped through into a corridor lined with offices and storage rooms. The sounds of gunfire were muffled here, but Victoria could still hear shouting and running footsteps echoing through the building.
How many? Daniel asked into his microphone. 8 attackers confirmed down, came the reply.
But there's at least 6 more, and the federal agents are treating everyone as hostile.
Understood. We're moving to Extraction Point Alpha.
Daniel led Victoria through a maze of corridors and stairwells that he seemed to know by heart.
They passed several museum employees huddled in offices, all looking terrified but unharmed. How do you know the layout so well?
Victoria asked as they climbed a service staircase.
We've been planning this for a week.
I know every room, every exit, every hiding place in this building. Daniel paused at a landing to check around the corner.
The question is, how did someone know we'd be here? You think we have a leak? I think someone with access to classified information sold us out. The question is whether it was someone on your father's staff, someone in my organization, or someone in federal law enforcement.
They reached the building's top floor and Daniel led her to a door marked authorized personnel only. Beyond was a narrow staircase that led to the museum's roof.
We're going up there?
Victoria asked nervously.
Emergency extraction.
We have a helicopter standing by. They climbed to the roof and emerged into the cool October air.
The city spread out below them, lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk.
In the distance, Victoria could see police cars and ambulances converging on the museum. Where's the helicopter? She asked.
Daniel checked his watch. 2 minutes.
They waited in tense silence, listening to the sounds of sirens and distant gunfire. Victoria found herself studying Daniel's profile in the fading light. Even now, with everything falling apart around them, he appeared completely calm.
Daniel, what happens if we can't figure out who's behind this? We keep running until we can.
His voice carried no emotion, but Victoria sensed the weight of resignation behind the words.
Is that any way to live?
Daniel looked at her directly.
It's better than being dead.
The helicopter appeared from the north, flying low to avoid radar detection.
As it settled onto the museum's roof, Victoria realized this was probably the moment when her old life ended forever.
She had been raised in privilege and security, always protected by wealth and political position. But those protections had proven inadequate against enemies who were willing to kill for billions of dollars in illegal profits. Now her safety depended entirely on a man who killed people for a living. A man whose real name she had only learned a week ago. A man who existed in a world of violence and deception that she was only beginning to understand.
Ready? Daniel asked as the helicopter's crew chief waved them forward. Victoria took one last look at the city lights below, then followed Daniel into the aircraft. Whatever happened next, there would be no going back to the comfortable illusions of her previous life. She was committed now to a path that led through violence and danger toward an uncertain destination. The only constant was Daniel himself, and the growing certainty that her survival depended completely on his lethal skills. As the helicopter lifted off into the night sky, Victoria wondered if she was being rescued or kidnapped. And realized that at this point, there might not be any difference. The war for her life was just beginning, and she was no longer a bystander. Whether she liked it or not, Victoria Ashworth had become an active participant in a conflict where the stakes were measured in human lives. The question was, how many people would die before it was over? And, when the killing finally stopped, would there be anything left of the person she used to be? The helicopter touched down on a private airfield 60 miles outside the city. Victoria could see a small jet waiting on the tarmac, its engines already spinning. Even in the darkness, she recognized the efficiency of a well-planned escape operation. "Where are we going?" she asked as they transferred from the helicopter to the jet. "International waters," Daniel replied. "There's a ship waiting. Neutral territory where we can regroup and figure out our next move." Victoria strapped herself into one of the jet's leather seats as they taxied toward the runway. Through the small window, she watched the lights of the city fall away below them. With each mile, she was moving further from everything she had known. "Daniel, I need you to be honest with me. Are we winning or losing this war?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the dark ocean below. "We're alive. Sometimes that's the only victory that matters." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I can give you right now." Daniel turned to face her. "Victoria, there are things about this situation that I haven't told you. Things that make it more complicated than just protecting you from pharmaceutical companies." Victoria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the airplane's air conditioning. "What kind of things?" "Your father's investigation uncovered more than illegal drug trials. He found evidence of money laundering, arms dealing, human trafficking. The pharmaceutical companies were just the visible layer of something much bigger." "How much bigger?" "International crime syndicate bigger. Government corruption bigger. The kind of operation that has resources we can't match and connections we can't break." Victoria closed her eyes and tried to process this information. She had thought they were fighting pharmaceutical executives who were willing to bend ethical rules for profit. Now Daniel was telling her they were up against something that sounded like a conspiracy theory come to life. "So what's the plan?" "We can't run forever." "No, we can't." Daniel pulled out a secure phone and began typing a message. "But we don't have to run much longer. Help is coming." "What kind of help?" "The kind that levels playing fields." 2 hours later, they landed on the deck of a ship that appeared to be a luxury yacht but was clearly something else entirely. Victoria could see radar arrays and communication equipment that belonged on a military vessel, not a pleasure craft. Daniel led her to a comfortable cabin below deck, but Victoria noticed the steel reinforcement in the walls and the sophisticated locks on the door. This was a floating fortress disguised as a rich person's toy. "Get some rest," Daniel said. "Tomorrow we end this." "How?" "By giving our enemies exactly what they think they want." Victoria woke to the sound of voices in the corridor outside her cabin. She checked her watch, 6 a.m. Through the porthole, she could see gray ocean stretching to the horizon under an overcast sky. She found Daniel in the ship's main salon, studying satellite photographs spread across a large table. Standing beside him was a woman Victoria didn't recognize, tall, blonde, wearing the same type of practical clothing that seemed to be a uniform among Daniel's colleagues. "Victoria, this is Sarah Chen, Aegis International's operations director," Daniel said without looking up from the photographs. "Margaret Chen's sister?" Victoria asked. "No relation," Sarah replied. "Though the coincidence did help us place someone close to you at that first event." Victoria felt another piece of her certainty crumble. "Margaret was working with you?" Margaret Chan works for the Children's Hospital Foundation, Daniel said.
But she's also been helping federal investigators track illegal pharmaceutical trials. When we learned about the threat against you, she agreed to keep us informed about your social calendar.
So the first attack was expected. We just didn't expect them to be quite so professional. Daniel finally looked up from the photographs.
But it gave us valuable intelligence about their capabilities and methods. Sarah Chan activated a large screen on the salon's wall, showing what appeared to be a corporate office building.
This is Meridian Pharmaceuticals' headquarters in Switzerland.
According to the intelligence we've gathered, they're the center of the network your father has been investigating.
Meridian, Victoria repeated.
Like the hotel where the first attack happened.
Not a coincidence, Sarah confirmed. They own the hotel.
They also own the security company that was supposed to protect you that night, which is how they knew to drug your regular bodyguards. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Victoria realized that every aspect of the attacks had been carefully planned by people with unlimited resources and connections throughout the security industry.
What's the plan? She asked.
Daniel smiled, and Victoria realized she was beginning to recognize the expression that meant someone was about to die.
We're going to accept their invitation, he said.
What invitation?
Sarah activated another screen showing what appeared to be an email message. This arrived an hour ago.
Dr. Klaus Richter, CEO of Meridian Pharmaceuticals, wants to meet with you personally to discuss your father's investigation. Victoria read the message with growing disbelief.
He wants me to come to Switzerland? Alone?
Of course not alone, Daniel said.
You'll have an escort.
A nervous young man named Marcus who definitely isn't capable of protecting you from serious threats.
You want to go back to pretending to be incompetent?
I want them to think they're finally getting what they want. A chance to control the situation with minimal risk.
Daniel stood and walked to the windows overlooking the ocean. What they don't know is that Aegis International has spent the last week infiltrating their entire operation.
Sarah activated additional screens showing floor plans, personnel files, and surveillance footage. We have people inside their headquarters, their security company, even their personal protection details.
When you walk into that building, you won't be walking into a trap. You'll be walking into the center of our operation.
Victoria studied the intelligence displays with fascination and growing dread. The Meridian building was a 40-story tower in the heart of Zurich, surrounded by other corporate headquarters and government offices.
Attacking it would be like launching an assault on a small city. How many people are we talking about? She asked.
Richter has about 200 people working in that building, Sarah replied.
Maybe 50 of them are security personnel.
But only a dozen or so are actually involved in the criminal activities.
And the others?
Innocent employees who don't know what their company really does.
Daniel turned back to face Victoria. That's why this has to be surgical.
We go in, get Richter and his core team, and get out without harming anyone who doesn't deserve it. Victoria was quiet for a long moment.
Daniel, there's something I need to tell you.
What?
I don't want to do this anymore.
The words came out in a rush.
I don't want to be responsible for more people dying.
I don't want to live in a world where my safety requires killing other people, even if they're criminals.
Daniel and Sarah exchanged glances.
Victoria could see they had been expecting this conversation.
What are you suggesting? Sarah asked gently. Let me disappear. Give me a new identity, relocate me somewhere safe. Let my father finish his investigation without worrying about my safety.
Victoria, Daniel said quietly, it doesn't work that way.
These people have too many resources, too many connections. Eventually they would find you. And, next time, I might not be there to protect you. Then, what's the alternative? Spend the rest of my life as a target in an endless war? The alternative is ending the war, Sarah said firmly.
Klaus Richter and his organization are responsible for hundreds of deaths. Children who died in illegal drug trials, witnesses who were eliminated, law enforcement officers who asked too many questions.
This isn't just about your safety anymore.
Victoria walked to the windows and stared out at the gray ocean. She had never asked to become a soldier in this conflict. A week ago, her biggest moral dilemma had been choosing which charities deserved her support. Now she was being asked to participate in what was essentially an assassination mission. But Sarah was right.
This wasn't just about her anymore.
If I do this, Victoria said slowly, how do we make sure it actually ends?
How do we know there won't just be someone else to take Richter's place?
Daniel joined her at the windows.
Because we're not just going after Richter. We're going after the entire network. Financial records, communication systems, personnel files.
When we're done, there won't be an organization left to continue the work.
And the federal agents who think you're the threats? We'll have access to enough evidence to prosecute every surviving member of the conspiracy, Sarah said. Your father's investigation will provide the legal framework, and our operation will provide the evidence.
Victoria closed her eyes and tried to imagine a future where she could return to her old life. Charity galas, social obligations, the comfortable routines of inherited privilege.
It seemed impossible now.
She had seen too much, learned too much about the darkness that existed parallel to her sheltered world.
What would you need me to do? She asked. Daniel smiled that dangerous smile again. Be yourself.
Walk into Klaus Richter's office like the confident, privileged senator's daughter you've always been. Let him think he's finally gotten control of the situation.
And then? Then, let me do what I do best. Victoria nodded slowly.
She was committed now to seeing this through to its conclusion, whatever that might be. The woman who had attended a charity gala a week ago no longer existed. In her place was someone harder, someone who understood that safety sometimes required violence. When do we leave for Switzerland? She asked.
Tomorrow morning, Sarah replied.
But first, there are some things you need to learn.
If you're going to walk into the heart of enemy territory, you need to be prepared for anything.
Victoria spent the rest of the day learning skills she had never imagined needing. How to recognize surveillance.
How to communicate using coded phrases.
How to identify exit routes and potential weapons in any environment. Most importantly, how to hide her fear behind the mask of aristocratic confidence that had been trained into her since childhood.
By evening, she felt as ready as she would ever be.
The plan was complex but elegant. She would accept Richter's invitation, accompanied by the same nervous young escort who had failed to protect her at previous events. What Richter wouldn't know was that Marcus had spent a week studying every detail of the Meridian building and identifying every person who worked there. Victoria, Daniel said as they prepared for the next day's mission, there's one more thing you need to know.
What? My real name isn't Daniel Kim. It's David Kim.
I lied about that because I wanted to maintain some separation between my professional and personal identities. Victoria looked at him with surprise.
Why are you telling me this now? Because tomorrow might be the last day we spend together.
If something goes wrong, if I don't make it out of that building, I wanted you to know at least one true thing about me. Victoria felt something twist in her chest. Over the past week, she had come to depend on Daniel in ways she was only beginning to understand. The thought of losing him was almost as frightening as the thought of dying herself. Nothing's going to go wrong, she said firmly. We're going to walk into that building, end this nightmare, and walk out together. David smiled, and, for the first time since she had met him, it looked genuinely happy instead of dangerous.
Yes, he said. We are.
But, as Victoria fell asleep that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would change everything, and not necessarily in ways she could predict or control. The war was almost over. The only question was who would still be alive when the last shot was fired.